Der er signering i bog og idéstand. And now on stage, B.A. Paris will be talking to Niels Lillelund om sammenbruddet.
Hello. Yeah.
Shall I turn mine?
Yes. No, it has to. Yeah, like the.
I don't think. Oh yes, it is. Yes, that's fine.
Welcome, B.A. Paris. Would you start out by telling us, please, B.A., what does it stand for?
So BA stands for Bernadette Anne, but Bernadette is such a long name to put on a book, so I just thought I'd use my initials. And actually, I can say this because my mother's not here, but I don't actually like my name. So, and I'd never tell her that, but I don't like my name, so I didn't want it on my book.
So it's just B.A.
Yes,
from here.
that's
Yes.
right,
Okay.
Or Bernadette. You can call me Bernadette.
Is
Yes,
that
that's
okay?
fine. Yes, I
Yes.
don't mind people calling me that.
Okay.
So.
We're here to talk about your book Breakdown in the sort of domestic noir, if you will. But could you start out, please, by telling us a little bit about yourself? Because I know that you came actually quite late to writing.
Yes, I actually not picked up a pen. I sat in front of a computer to write when I was 50. So, it's never too late to start writing if anybody wants to write here. Because really, I always wanted to write, but I just never really had the time before. I have 5 children, and I was very busy bringing them up, and I just thought, well, one day I'll write when I have the time, and it just so happened that that time came. So I started writing, and I was very lucky.
And did you just start, or did you have this novel inside of you all the time, or?
Not at all. I mean, I started writing basically because well, I wanted to write children's stories, and then one of my daughters had an idea for a novel, and there was a competition in a newspaper in England for a novel, and I said to my daughter, you should write your novel. And then she said, no, I can't, I'm only 16, I'm not allowed to, you have to be 18, but why don't you write a novel? And I said, I could never write a novel, 80,000 words, I just couldn't do it. But that night I went to bed and I started thinking of a story about a family. And then I just started writing, and I couldn't stop for 6 months. I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and I wrote about 4 books. And after 4 years, I decided to try and get them published, and everybody was saying, no, you write well, we like the story, but it's not what sells. And I said, well, what sells? And they said psychological thrillers. And I said, I'll never write a psychological thriller. And then I wrote Behind Closed Doors, which to me was just a book. Mm-hmm. I didn't think about what it was. And then everybody said, oh, it's a great psychological thriller. So I just had to start writing psychological thrillers.
And it's not only that, it's also what you call domestic noir. Is this something, did you even know the name of that genre when you started out?
No, I didn't. And sometimes I think domestic noir is a bit simplistic. It makes it sound like, but it is domestic noir, because domestic means the family, and all of them, my book's always about the family, the couple in a house. Yeah. So I suppose it is domestic noir.
Yeah.
I'd rather it was called psychological thriller because it sounds better. Domestic makes it sound a bit trivial, but if you want to categorise my books, domestic noir is probably quite good.
Yeah, but the sort of thing when you say, who is my husband really, and what's really going on. And,
that's it.
The noir being, of course, everything you know well, and there's something underneath, correct?
I like exploring that. I like thinking that the people that we think we know, we don't actually know them. And they could have secrets that we've never known about. So, I do like kind of exploring that side of things. And I like exploring couples that look perfectly happy on the outside, but behind closed doors, they're not. And I think that's interesting. I think we don't really want to read about happy couples, do we? It makes us look at ourselves and think, so we like reading about people that are probably going through worse things than we are. Yeah. I think.
Let's turn then to Breakdown. Which is, of course, about a woman who is breaking down in a sense.
Yes.
And it looks to be her own fault. You better tell it yourself.
Well, the breakdown, actually, it's a really interesting title in English because it means so many things. And in fact, the breakdown, it was the breakdown of the car at the beginning of my book, and then also the mental breakdown. So I was just interested in writing this book because I was travelling back through some woods in a storm, and I thought, what would happen if I saw a car broken down? If it was at night, would I stop to help the person? And I thought, well, I probably wouldn't. I'd be too scared. And I thought, actually, that's a good start to a thriller. So I started writing that. And, again, it's about a couple. And are the appearances really what you think? But I also wanted to explore this notion of a mental breakdown when you become overcome with fear about something. And you start imagining all sorts of things. So in my book, my heroine, Cass, she doesn't know, well, she thinks she has dementia, because her mother did, and does she have dementia or doesn't she have dementia? And that's it. And I think it's her big fear. It just escalates.
Yeah. And her husband seems to be helpful.
He's a very nice guy. He's very helpful.
Isn't he?
I don't want to give the book away in case anybody hasn't read it yet. But this is really hard talking about your books when they're psychological thrillers, because it's, you don't want to give too much away. You don't want to spoil the story. But yes, again, it's about, who's telling the truth and who isn't telling the truth.
Do you find it more difficult to write these sort of domestic noir or psychological thrillers than you would writing, for example, I don't know, a story about terrorism in New York or something, because the drama is so much on the inside?
I was really surprised that I could write a psychological thriller, because I didn't think it was ever something I would write. But I find that I quite like that kind of mental gymnastics of trying to make the reader believe something and actually leading them down another path. And I really like to do that. I like to think of ways and twists. And so I find it quite easy, I think, to write those type of books. But it's not what I want to write forever. I have other books I want to write. In fact, my new book, which is coming out next year, isn't really a psychological thriller because there's no crime in it as such. So, but it's still lots of suspense. So, it's, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking that we are in a domestic environment and we have this sort of everyday thing happening. Take, for example, the phone rings.
Well, yes.
Well, the phone rings all the time, and it's annoying people calling you, but now it becomes more than just annoying.
I think, even I don't like it if I get a phone call and I lift up the receiver and there's nobody there, and you just think, oh, it's the wrong number. And if it happens again, you begin to think, and it's very easy to you scare yourself. It's quite easy to get carried away with your fears. So, in my books, it's usually things that I think will frighten me, and I'll write about that, and so I find that quite easy.
And it's also about windows not being closed. Did I remember to close it,
well,
and so on
all
and so
that.
forth?
Sometimes I come back and I find a window open and I think, has somebody been in my house? I'm afraid very easily. I get scared quite easily, and I have a big imagination, so I always think the worst, or, I'm always suspicious. So I think that's why I find it quite easy to write about that kind of thing.
Of course, Baz thinks that that the murderer is following her, doesn't
Yes.
she? Yes.
Yes, because I thought that was an interesting concept, that after she sees the woman in the car and she decides not to stop to help, and then something terrible happens to that woman, well, the guilt, and then she thinks that somebody might have seen her. So, she has so many fears, Cass. It's really terrible for her because she thinks that she's having a mental breakdown. She thinks that somebody's following her. There's so many things going on in her life, and she feels such guilt about not stopping to help, which I think anybody would. I think if you don't stop and help somebody and then you find out that they've been murdered, it's awful. So
It is.
It must be. It hasn't happened to me, but
She
it
was
must be
warned
terrible.
not to take that way home.
Yes, she was warned not to take, and that was another thing. You see, she was warned by her husband not to take that way home.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and that's actually a kind of red herring, but it works.
Has anything like this happened to you or to someone you know? Because the way that you describe it, you're driving home through the woods one night and bam, there's a story.
Well, that happened to me, and that's what gave me the idea, because I was driving home and it was really dark and there was a storm, and I thought, oh gosh, if I broke down, I'd be terrified. And then I thought, and if I saw somebody broken down, would I stop to help? So, my books always start from something that kind of happens to me. And for my latest one, Bring Me Back, I was in France with my husband and we stopped at a picnic area and he went off and he left me alone in the car. And I thought, what if he came back and I was gone? And I thought, that's a good idea for a story. Of course, then I have to make a big story around it. Why is she gone? What has happened to her? Is he responsible? But, it's just those little things that happen to me that gives me a trigger for a story. So
you just think you're on a picnic and then and that's it, and then you
we stopped
start.
We stopped at the picnic area and he went off and there was nobody else around, and I just thought, and it's true. It's I think, what would happen if? For me, it's always what if. I'm in a situation and I think, what if? And I think actually that's a good start for a story, and I can build something around that.
How has it been for you? Because now you are, you came late into writing, and then now suddenly you're a best-selling writer. How has that changed your life?
It's changed my life because before, I was just a mum staying at home with my children. I was a teacher. I never thought that this would happen to me. If somebody had told me 3 years ago, in 3 years' time you'll be in Denmark talking about your books, you'll have had 3 books published, I would have said, no, that's somebody else's life, it's not mine. I couldn't have believed it. So it's incredible. And every day I'm pinching myself and saying, is this real? Because I just feel so privileged and so lucky. And I was just lucky that my first book, Behind Closed Doors, just happened to be a book that captured people's imagination. And I think I wrote it at the right time. Maybe if I wrote it today, it wouldn't be a big success. Maybe if I wrote it 10 years ago, it wouldn't be a big success. But lots of things happened that it just exploded.
Yeah.
Not just in the UK, but in 38 countries around the world. So I feel really, really lucky.
What
very
is your
lucky.
own explanation? Why did this work so well?
I don't know. I think it's a lot to do with the characters. I think that when I was writing it, I knew that Jack, even though he's horrible and a very evil person, I knew that he would capture people's imagination. So I knew I had a good character in Jack. And I had a good character in Grace and Millie as well, her sister. And I think the reason why maybe this book worked was because people, and not just women, because I have a lot of messages from men who've read this book and liked it, they could see themselves in that sort of position. They might not have experienced what Grace is going through, but they could say, this could happen to me. I think they're able to identify with my character. And I had so many messages from women who said, this is actually my story.
Yeah.
I'm kept prisoner by my husband, or, lots of things like this that, so it did strike a chord with a lot of people.
That's very scary, isn't it?
It is, and I was really surprised.
This sort of thing going on.
But I knew it does go on because I just knew that it did. I know that there are very controlling people. I mean, there could be controlling women as well. It's not just women that are victims. Men can be victims too. And this is what I try to show in my third book, because I didn't want everybody to think that I was only writing about women victims, because, men can find themselves in terrible situations as well. But, but I had a lot of messages from women who said, this is my story, this kind of thing is happening to me, or happened to me, and I managed to get away, and, so...
What has that meant for you, the interaction with the readers? Does it inspire you?
Yeah,
or,
it's amazing. I mean, people say, what's the best bit about being an author? And for me, actually, it's the contact with the readers. There's nothing better than having that exchange with readers, even by Twitter, or they say, I read your book, I loved it. Sometimes they might say, why did you do this, or why did you... But it's just to know, actually, that your readers are there and reading your book and want to come and see you. They want to listen to you talk, and they want to send you little messages. For me, that's just amazing.
Could you tell us a bit about how you work? Because when you describe your life, it's like you went on and you had children, and then suddenly you said, hey, let's become a best-selling author. But is that how it was?
I think when, I have 5 daughters, and I spent a lot of time with them when I was at home. And there were times when I would think, oh my God, is this ever going to end? Am I ever going to be able to do anything for myself? Because, I was very much a mother at home with my children. And even when I decided to go back to work, I retrained as a teacher so that I could be there for my daughters in the evening, that I could be there all the time for them. And there were times when I thought, I want to do something for myself, but I don't know what. But I never really imagined that I'd be an author to this extent, and it just... And I just feel so lucky because it happened when my last daughter left home. So now I would be thinking, well, what do I do with the rest of my life? So it's great that I have my writing. It's replaced my children, which is good.
Yes.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, no, my daughters are still very much there and present, but it fills my days in a way that, as I don't have children at home anymore, I wonder what I would do all day long.
So you found something.
Yes, I found something that keeps me, happy, and that I love doing.
Do your children read what you write before it's published? Or?
Well, funny, for the first 3 books they did. I wanted them to read it because I wanted to know if it was good enough, or. And for my next book, which will be out next year, I didn't feel that need, and they all said to me, "Mummy, we don't want to read your book because when we read it, you always change things after." So they've never actually read the finished book, and sometimes they'll say something to me and I'll say, oh, but I changed that, that's not in it now, and they say, oh. So this one, they all said to me, one of my daughters did read it, but the others all said, we'll wait till it's published and then we'll read it, which is fine now. I feel a bit more confident as a writer, I think. I didn't feel very confident as a writer before, so I think the more books you have out, you begin to think, well, yeah, maybe I am a writer now.
Do you feel comfortable enough as to go into other genres, or do you like this one too much?
You mean the festivals, or the...
No. The genres of your books, the domestic noir thing and so on. Are you going to keep writing there?
Well, funnily enough, my next book isn't exactly.
Okay.
It's not a psychological... It's dark, but it's not a psychological... As I said before, there's no... mostly there's a crime. In a psychological thriller, for me, in a thriller, there's usually a crime and a really evil person. In this next book, there isn't. So I am slightly going away from the psychological thriller, but it's still suspenseful. There's still lots of twists in it, I think, where the reader's going to wonder what's happening. But I don't always want to write maybe psychological thrillers, although my 5th book, which I'm going to start soon, that is a psychological thriller. So I just really want to write what I want to write without thinking too much about what genre it is.
Okay, thank you very much. We're looking forward to the next book.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. And there'll be book signing at the Bog og Idé stand.